So glad that you are here. Whether you are watching online or in person, I want to take a moment and just say thanks so much for joining us today. My name is John Velser, and along with my beautiful wife, Shannon, we get the honor and the privilege of being the pastors here at North Star Community Church. And if you are a guest of ours, you can text the word new to the number that's on the screen right there in front of you. We'd love to connect with you and get you some information about our church and help you also connect back with us. If you're in person, what you can do is you can actually swing by the Blue Guest kiosk on your way out today, and you can pick up a Chick-fil-A gift card, our way of saying, hey, thanks for being with us this morning. Before we get started into today, I want to say, man, didn't my wife and Jen Appleberry do an amazing job last week? Come on, yes. I can't wait to be able to do that again. I think they did an amazing job, and that was fun for all of us. However, man, I was like, why did we wait so long? We got to do that again and again and again. That was fun. We always have higher attendance when Shannon speaks, so I don't know if I should take that personally or if I should be insecure about that or what, but it was just like, man, she is prettier. I'm glad you said that, because if you would have said that I'm prettier, I'd have been like, well, that's a little weird there too. But we're so glad that everybody is here today. What it did was it really gave me a great opportunity to pray and to plan and prepare for what I believe God is doing in our church. And it's just so fun. I got to be able to stop and just take a moment and say, man, this is fun. The season that God has our church in is a fun season. It's a growing season. We're seeing a lot of growth when it comes to not just numerical or, attendance-wise. Those are good. Those are visible things that you can see. But it's also just the outreach that we're doing, the small groups that we're doing. We kicked off our freedom groups that have been happening, our midweek, from youth to kids to adults. They're just fun things that we're doing because we know that this is a season that God has us in, and it's just a fun season. I want to let you know I'm so thankful. A lot of this is happening because you're just simply inviting people. You're inviting friends, you're inviting family, you're inviting neighbors, you're just inviting people as they come, and we're watching them kind of just continue to stick around. And so that says something about you, but also says something about the church. Man, we're doing something right, and so thankful for that. And that kind of ties right into our word that we've had for the year. That word is movement. And if you're new around here, the movement simply means a sequential step in a process that causes people to take their next step. And that's my prayer for us as a church, is that we would continue to have movement, that we would continue to take the necessary steps. That's my prayer for you as a follower of Christ, is that you would take your necessary steps. But it's also my prayer for us, maybe if you're here today and you're not a follower of Christ, man, that's my prayer. That's why our whole vision is that people would know God. And if you don't know God, man, that's why we do Sunday mornings. We have a system in place that helps people know God, that takes their next step. And then we also have hey, you know what? We want you to know, not only know God, but we want you to find freedom. Those are in our freedom groups. We kicked those off a couple weeks ago. You could join anytime at midweek on Wednesday nights. We drop off your kids here. We meet over at the community center right across the street. There's knowing God. There's finding freedom. There's discovering your purpose. You can go to Growth Track. We have our new one kicking off on March 7th. We're wrapping it up today. We have a bunch of people graduating today from all of that. Fun things that are happening. All of that is to say this. Here's what our goal is to help people continue to take their right next step. A lot of people oftentimes will just kind of stay back and say, man, I've said yes to Jesus, and it's like, but what are you doing with it? And there's not a whole lot of movement that's happening. But here's what you have to understand, is that God honors movement. We see that all throughout the scriptures. God honors movement. I want to share the story of Nehemiah with you. Many of you know the story of Nehemiah and how he gets this burden to rebuild the walls. He's a cupbearer for King Artaxerxes, and now he's saying, listen, I've got this dream, and I've got this vision, I've got this burden, and I want to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And King Artaxerxes says, you can go and do that. So he goes and he rebuilds these walls of Jerusalem that have been down for 140 years. And with the walls of Jerusalem being down, what it did was it left the place where God's people would meet, almost like the church, the place where God's people would meet. It left them vulnerable and open to attacks, and they could never advance. They just never could make it forward. And it sounds familiar to today. That every time the church stands up, it's too hard for the church to advance. Every time we get a one step forward, it feels like it's another step back. But here's what we realize through the story of Nehemiah is that God honors movement. Nehemiah, he sees a need, he gets a burden, and then all of a sudden he starts to move and he builds a team and they work hard and they finish strong. What does he do? He sees a need, he gets a burden, he builds a team, he works hard, and they finish strong. He sees a need. He gets a burden. He builds a team or gets on a team. He works hard and he finishes strong. A lot of times Christians will do the first two things and never have movement in their life. They'll see a need, they'll get a burden, and then we stop. It's that movement, the sequential step in a process that causes people to move forward. It's, come on, hey, we got to build a team. We got to work hard, and we have to finish strong. And that's the movement that God honored in Nehemiah's life. When he saw a need, he got a burden, he built a team, he worked hard, he finished strong. That's my prayer for us as well as a church and as your pastor for you, that you wouldn't just see a need, that you would get a burden, something that moves you to do something. And you get on a team or you build a team, and man, something has to be done. We can't just sit around any longer. Something has to be done. And you get on a team or you build a team and you work hard. You finish strong. But you have to understand, every time that you begin to take steps forward, the enemy will always take notice and will try to create opposition. You ever notice that in your life? Man, I'm really going to work hard. I'm going to break some habits in my life. And the moment you start to take steps forward, the enemy creates opposition. Every single time, I'm going to lose some weight and Twinkies go on sale. Never fails. We're going to get financial freedom in our life. We're going to buckle down. It's going to be awesome. Car breaks down. Right? It never fails. Every time you try to take steps forward in your relationships, in your marriage, in your life with your kids, in your finances, in your career, in your dream, in your faith, every time you try to take steps forward, the enemy will always try to create opposition. It's no different in the story of Nehemiah. We tell the story. He rebuilds the wall of Jerusalem that had been down for 140 years, and he's rebuilding the walls. He's strengthening God's people, the place where God's people meet. But you have to understand, within that story, every time he stepped forward, the enemy continued to create opposition. Watch what it says in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1. It says that when Sanballat heard that he was rebuilding the walls, he became angry and was greatly incensed, and he ridiculed the Jews. When you start to rebuild what people have intentionally torn down in your life, you have to understand that they are going to get angry and they will ridicule you. Because they are tearing down, and God's trying to build up, and you're trying to build this thing up, and they have intentionally torn it down so that they can get to you, so they can attack you, and now you're trying to rebuild this wall up. You're trying to get yourself to a safe place. You're trying to do this, and the enemy comes in, and now he begins to ridicule. Why? Because you're building up what they have been trying to tear down. Verse 8, he says this: they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Come on, what do you do when people stir up trouble against you? Here's what we post it on Facebook. Right? We're going to tweet that. We're going to put it on Instagram. When people stir up trouble against you, we try to rally our troops together. We try to get people on our side. And I need to create the narrative over here before they create the narrative. And now, what does Nehemiah do? Here's what Nehemiah does. He prays. Watch what he says in verse 9. But we prayed to our God, and we posted, not on Facebook, but we posted a guard. We posted a guard day and night to meet his threats. And meanwhile, the people in Judah, here's what they said. Now watch this. The people of Judah, they're with Nehemiah. He saw a need. Come on, Nehemiah. He got a burden. Yeah, baby. He builds a team. The people of Judah are on his team. They're like, let's rebuild the walls. We are with you, Nehemiah. We can do this. Come on, we shall overcome. Let's build the walls. And now they begin to hear the words of Sanballat. You'll never be able to rebuild the walls. It's too much rubble. It can't be done. They've been down for 140 years. This will never happen for your life. This will never happen for your family. This will never happen. And now what do? Watch what happens. They begin to listen to what Sanballat and his buddy Tobiah said. And they respond to Nehemiah, and they said, Nehemiah, and the strength of the laborers is given out. There's too much rubble. We can't rebuild the walls. Let me just say this to you. The voice that you listen to the most determines the direction you move in. I was going to say this, and I didn't. I took it out, so I'm not saying it because I didn't write it in there. But the news station you listen to the most. But I didn't say that. I took it out of my notes. The people you give the most influence into your life will determine the direction that you begin to move in. The Bible says, above all else, guard your heart, for it determines the direction and the quality of life that you live. You've got to guard the heart. And so he's saying, listen, come on, guys, we've got to rebuild this wall. We've got to do this. And they go, man, I don't know, maybe Sanballat was right. We can't rebuild the walls. This won't happen. Look at how long they've been down. If you're not careful, you'll begin to believe the lies of Sanballat and Tobiah. And what you begin to do in that moment is, rather than rebuild, you start to reevaluate. Well, they have been down for a while. Well, they are kind of old. Well, that's a lot of work. Well, I just don't know if we can do it. I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't know if I have the skill. I don't know if we have the skill. And all of a sudden, reevaluating becomes debilitating, and you can't move forward from that. And so what happens? People stop moving. But God has called us to be people of movement, and He honors movement in our life. Let me just ask you this question for your life. Which voice have you given ear to that is talking against the work God wants you to build? Man, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Listen, some people have given up on their marriage, their dreams, their hope, 2020. It's just so much rubble. I just don't know. How can we rebuild our marriage from this? How can we rebuild our life? How can we rebuild our finance? How can we rebuild our career? How can we rebuild? There's just so much rubble. And I love what Nehemiah does in verse 14. This is a key verse for us this morning. Nehemiah says, after I looked things over, listen, there is a time to reevaluate. You've got to take some steps back. You've got to assess the situation, but at some point, you've got to move. And so Nehemiah says, listen, after I looked things over, he reevaluated. I love this. Watch this. I stood up. I believe it's time for the church to stand up and start moving in the same direction. It's time to have movement. What we've done is we've done the first part. After I've looked things over and 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 looked things over, and I evaluate and I reevaluate what I reevaluated, because I'm still evaluating what I'm reevaluating, and I'm just not sure. Nehemiah said, I took a step back, I reevaluated, and I began to start moving. He stood up, and what's he do? He says to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid. Come on. What a word for 2021. Remember the Lord. He is great and He is awesome. Here's what Nehemiah is doing. They're saying, Nehemiah, we started to rebuild the walls and things are going good and this is awesome and this is amazing. But man, Sanballat comes in. He starts telling us all these things, and maybe he's right, and maybe we can, and maybe we won't, and maybe we shouldn't, and maybe it's not the right time. And Nehemiah says, listen, hey, don't be afraid. Remember God. He is great and He is awesome. He's reminding us, hey, I need you to remember He's the same God that pulled you from there to here. Remember, He's the same God that delivered you. He's the same God that healed you. He's the same God that forgave you. He's the same. Come on, remember the Lord. Remember where He's brought you. Remember what He's done in your life. Come on, remember He's great and He's awesome. And then he says, now here's what I need you to do. I need you to turn around. And I need you to remember there's something worth fighting for. And he says this, now fight for your families. Fight for your sons. Fight for your daughters. Fight for your wives. Come on, I believe it's time for the church to start fighting for our families. Fighting to rebuild the church, rebuild America, rebuild our cities. They need Jesus. We've got to get back on the wall and start rebuilding. This is a rebuilding season. This is not a reevaluating season. We've got to get back on the wall. We've got to build. Why do we do midweek? Come on. We're rebuilding the walls of our family. We're rebuilding a generation. We're rebuilding America. We're rebuilding our city. We're rebuilding the church. Well, Pastor, there's not a lot of room around here. I don't know if we can do that. And Pastor, I'm just not sure. Like, who's going to do the kids' ministry? Trisha will. Who's going to do this? And who's going to do that? Mike will. And how are we going to do this? And why? And it's like, listen, I'm for you. We need to reevaluate. But then there's a time to move. I'm so stinking proud of our church because when COVID hit, we took a time to reevaluate. We would meet here at the church. We were essential workers. We're essential. I was like, you're essential and you're essential. And I'm essential. First time I've ever been called essential in my life. I was like, baby, I'll take it. Whatever you got to do. We came as a church. We came as a staff. We started reevaluating things. Hey, you know what? What do we need to do in this season? Listen, if we're online, we've got to get better camera equipment. We've got to make some adjustments here. We didn't have it budgeted and itemized, and we're going to do this for that, but we got to make a move. We got to reevaluate, and then we got to move. We got to reevaluate, and then we got to move. We got to reevaluate, we got to move. That's what Nehemiah did. He took a step back. He reevaluated, and he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stand up. We're going to fight. Don't be afraid of them. Remember God. Man, if there's a word for 2020 to remind the church of Jesus Christ, churches, capital C, all across the nations, here it is. Remember the Lord. Don't be afraid. Come on, remember the Lord. It's time to stand up and start moving in that right direction. We are in a rebuilding season. This is not the time to sit back as a church. This is not the time to sit back as followers of Christ. We have the attention of the world staring dead at us, and we're sitting back going, well, let's just see what we should do now. I wonder if, no, that wouldn't work. We got Tobias over there. He just, negative Nelly. And Sam Ballot, he just over there. You know how he is in every board meeting. Just, hey, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do this, we can't do this. And it's time for leaders, the church, I believe it's called to be the leader of the nation, to stand up and go, here's what we're going to do. Hey, we're not going to be afraid of them. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to stand up and we are going to become who God's called us to become. We're going to move in the direction God called us to move in, and we're not going to be afraid of them. Why? Because I remember the Lord. I remember what he did for me. I remember how he saved me. I remember how he took care of us. I remember how he provided. We're going to remember the Lord. This is why we fought to stay open as a church. This is why we started our midweek. We're fighting for families. Why? Because people need the Lord. This is a rebuilding season. And here's what I'll say, is that for some of you, sitting back and reevaluating is killing your faith. It's killing your drive. It's killing your dream. It's killing your passion, your determination, your perception, and your participation. Pastor, I just don't feel, come on, remember the Lord. It's interesting that Sanballat and Tobias were actually governors in their day. And they were talking against what the church could do. And I love how they stood up and said, no, we're not going to do that. But we fought as a church to make sure that we stayed open. Why? Because people need the Lord. People needed hope. People needed Jesus. People needed answers. People needed a deliverance. People needed the Lord in their life, and we fought. And I love it because we had a governor and many governors, and I'm not speaking politically, so don't hear what I'm not saying. But around the world, people were saying churches couldn't meet, churches couldn't do that. I was so tempted because we could go to Menards and Home Depot and have 500 people there. Aisle 42, plumbing aisle, church service. Let's make it happen. Like I would like, people need Jesus. I don't care what we got to do. People need Jesus. You can go to California and strip clubs are still open, but you can't go to church. It's time to stand up and fight and go, no. Here's what we're going to do. And so Nehemiah, every time he took a step forward, he faced opposition. This is the time for us to rebuild, not to sit back and reevaluate. And I love what happens because verse 15, he says, when our enemies heard that they were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated. Ooh, I love that. You ever had somebody you just frustrated, you just enjoyed frustrating? My two kids, they love frustrating each other. And when they finally get them frustrated, it's kind of like, got them. You ever been there before? Not you personally, but somebody you know that did that to their spouse. And you're like, yeah, God, man, that's what happened in this moment. God, through the power of the Holy Spirit, allows Nehemiah to see what the enemy is trying to do, and he now overcomes it, and now it frustrates the enemy. And here's what happens. They all return to the wall, each to our own work. Listen, we return. What they do, they return to the wall. Nehemiah, I just don't know if we can do that. Listen, I need you. Don't be afraid of them. I need you to fight. I need you to remember the Lord. Remember He's great, and remember He's awesome. Come on. It's time to get back out on the wall. And they forgot everything that they were saying. And Tobias was saying, and Sanballat was saying, and they get back on the wall, each to their own work. You can't miss this, that 4 times they kept coming back trying to get Nehemiah off of the wall. 4 times. The enemy is persistent. The enemy will keep coming back and back and back. Why? Because you're trying to build up what the enemy has tried to tear down. And every time you take a step forward and they notice what's going on, notice that first passage we read, they noticed that they were rebuilding the walls, and he became angry. And he began to ridicule. Come on. It's time to remember the Lord. Stand up. Let's fight. And they each returned back to their wall, and the enemy kept coming back 4 times. And every single time he came back, Nehemiah's response, Nehemiah created what psychologists have called the cracked record theory. How many of you know what a cracked record does? How many of you know what a cracked record does? How many of you know what a cracked record does? How many of you know what a cracked record does? How many of you know what a cracked record? It just repeats itself, right? It just gets stuck in that groove. Some of you young people are like, what is a record? Google it. You'll be like, a record? Was that like what Michael Phelps did when he was swimming? No. You can explain that all to them. They'll be here. Mike will help you to the after service. But record, man, it was that crack record theory. Listen, let me help some of you out here. The crack record theory is where you just keep repeating the same thing. You create a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, whatever it is, a short line, and that's your response. Yeah, but what are you going to, and it's just a crack record. I just say this. They say it takes people 5 times before they actually go, oh, so what you're saying is, and that's exactly what Nehemiah did. Elijah, if you want to come on up. Nehemiah responds in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3. Every single time they kept coming up, Nehemiah, why don't you come off the wall? Nehemiah, you're never going to be able to rebuild the wall. Nehemiah, this isn't going to work. And by the end, they're saying, Nehemiah, why don't we just meet? Let's just grab some coffee. Let's just hang out. Every single time he responded the same way, and he simply said these words, I'm carrying on a great project and cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? I love that. Nehemiah, we should come down. Nehemiah, let's talk. Maybe we can get you some help. Nehemiah, why don't you come and let's conversate on this. I'm carrying on a great work and cannot come down. Why should the work stop and I leave it to go down to you? Why should the work stop? I love that. Why should the church stop? Why should the work stop? Nehemiah sees a need. He gets a burden. He builds a team. He works hard, and he finishes strong. That's my prayer for you. You see a need, you get a burden. You go to growth track. You get on a team. You make a difference. You finish strong. What Nehemiah was doing, because the people were going, what do we do? And 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 what do you think's happening? And Nehemiah, hey, here's what he did. Watch this. Nehemiah was getting the people in alignment. Hey. Don't you listen to him. Don't you listen to them. Turn around, face the wall. Come on, let's build the wall, and let's build the wall, and let's build the wall. The Bible says in one hand they had a sword, in another hand they were laying bricks, and they were ready to fight, but they were ready to build. I think that's a great depiction of what the church needs to look like. We need to be armed and ready with the sword of the Lord, which is God's word, and we need to keep building and keep building. Some of us were trying to fight so much that we forgot to build. Man, we've got to build the word. We've got to build the house. We've got to build the family. We've got to build, but we've got to be able to fight too. Come on, remember the Lord. He's great, and he's awesome. And Nehemiah, as he's doing this, he's getting them in alignment. What should have taken a lifetime to rebuild only took Nehemiah 52 days. The walls were down for 140 years. It should have taken a lifetime, but Nehemiah, because he kept realigning the people and casting vision, great leaders cast vision, and he's casting the vision, he's keeping it in front of him. It took him 52 days to rebuild these walls. Alignment is so powerful. With everything going on last year, I would say that churches were out of alignment. We cared more about popular Christianity than we did about scriptures, and we cared about being holy, that we cared about being biblical. We cared about making sure that we were real politically correct because we don't want to offend anybody. I've listened to pastors who refuse to say the word sin or hell. We just want to make everybody feel good in this place. Come on, anybody feel good in this place? We care more about lights and smoke. We cared more about big bands and all those things, and I love all that stuff. I mean, I'm not in for the smoke too much because you got a little asthma attack or something, you know what I'm saying? I'm all for that. Nothing wrong with any of that. But when we care more about that, when we do about scriptures, we get out of alignment. Dr. Tony's here, and I can tell you this, and I've shared this with him before. I had 3 back surgeries prior to even moving back here to Minnesota. We had our oldest son, Aiden, and I was supposed to have 3 back surgeries, and as I go in, they only do 1 per visit, and it's an extreme thing. My wife, who had just had our oldest son, goes into she waited for me to get, I was like, woo, we were ready to go back for surgery, and she says, hey, real quick, before you take him back there, can we get all 3 done today? I don't know if she was looking for a discount or what, but she was like, and they were like, normally we don't do that. We normally don't recommend doing that. It's a heavy procedure. It's just not listen, I just had a baby, and so I can't keep coming back and forth to this. We need to get this in and get this out. All I know is I walked out with 3 back surgeries. The doctor came in. This is Chicago. The doc came in. He was like, we're operating on the knee, right? And I was like, huh? I'm like, no, the back. These are good. This is not. Even after 3 back surgeries, just major pain. I remember there was a young girl named Melissa who was coming to our church when we were meeting over at Andover Theater. And she was working for a chiropractor somewhere away, and she could tell, like you could just see, like I looked like I was probably 80, 90 years old. I would kind of walk around and shuffle and just kind of preach and thought you didn't know it, but I literally would preach like this, and I would be done preaching, and I would literally try to have to straighten up, and it just so much pain. And she came, she said, you got to go check out this doctor, and he's a chiropractor. I'm like, I'm not going to go see some whack job. Like, no offense. Like, I just didn't understand. She's like, he's right here. He's here. I just didn't understand chiropractic. I was like, man, I'm not going to go see this guy. And I go in, and he does these scans, and that's when you know you're going to a right chiropractor. If they just go in and adjust you, let me just tell you this, leave, run, fast, quick, go. He goes in before he touches me. He says, we're going to do a scan. Now, he does this thing. He says, where's the most pain? I said, well, you're the doc. I wanted to see what he knew. Based on the scans, he goes, here's these 2 major places where you're having problems. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I can help you with that. And he begins to start working. I can tell you this, that I finally feel like I can say this with all sincerity, that I got my life back. I get to play with my kids. I get to run around with my kids. I get to spend time with my kids. I get to play ball with my kids. I get to carry my one kid, I get to do all those things. Why? Because here's what he did, was he continued to work on getting my spine in alignment. The body functions properly when the spine is in alignment. And so he would adjust my spine. He would get everything in alignment. And it's like, man, that feels good. Like I leave there, I walk in some days real stiff, and I walk out, I'm like, this is great. Man, I needed that. What did he do? Oh, here's what he did. He got my spine in alignment. And when my spine is in alignment, my body can function properly. What God is doing in this season for the church is he's bringing his body into alignment. He's bringing alignment to his body so that we can move properly. In the New Testament, the body is called the church. He's bringing the church into alignment so that we can move properly and help people know God and find freedom and discover their purpose and make a difference. The sequential steps in a process. But God is saying, listen, I need you to get into alignment so that we can move as a church and we can rebuild walls that have been torn down in people's lives and in their marriages and in their homes and in their faith. Let's rebuild these walls. Let's strengthen the marriage. Let's strengthen the home. Let's strengthen people's faith in God. Come on, let's rebuild. Remember the Lord. He's great. He's awesome. I want to encourage you today. Say, man, let's move. Let's move together. What's your next step? What's your next step? Most people, they see a need, they get a burden, and they stop there. They know God. But it's finding freedom and discovering their purpose is where most Christians get stuck. I just said yes to God, and now I just don't know about this faith thing, and I don't know if it's really working for me, and I don't know what's really happening. Come on. God's saying, come on, take the next step. Take the next step. Go to a freedom group. Get in a freedom group. Find a group. Go to Growth Track. Get on a team. Find a group. Go to Growth Track. Get in a team. March 7th, Pastor Luke will talk about in just a few moments. Man, we got our next round of Growth Track coming in. We just asked for 4 weeks, everybody. 4 weeks. We can help you learn how to take those sequential steps in your life. But Pastor, why are we building a team? Because we're rebuilding. We're rebuilding. It's a rebuilding season. This is not a reevaluating season. This is time to rebuild. Why? Because the lives are at stake. Just take a moment, close your eyes, and bow your heads. I want you to kind of take that as an honest assessment for your life. Come on. What's your next step? Don't leave here today without taking that next step. God is asking for his church to get in proper alignment. That's what Nehemiah was doing. He was getting the people in alignment, casting vision. Come on. Remember the Lord. Remember the Lord. Remember the Lord. Now let's fight for something that's worth fighting for. Let's fight for our sons, our daughters, our wives, our home. Come on, let's fight. I want us to be a church that fights for the next generation, that fights for our cities, that fight for America, that fights for our church. So today, what's your next step? Come on, the enemy will try to create opposition. What's your next step?